Hello, party people, and welcome back. Can I hear some noise? That was a lot of noise. We done good, guys. Welcome back. We're going to be talking about nervous system health. And for some of you, you're going to think, oh, this is the episode for me. Hot diggity dog. Some of you might be feeling like, this is irrelevant to me. I have tummy problems, lady. But nay, dear viewer, nay. What we're going to be getting into is relevant because the gut-brain axis controls your gut, and ultimately you've got to keep those neurons healthy. So in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to keep neurons, nerve cells in general, healthy. And then in the next episode, we're going to do another Amy and Nikki deep dive on the vagus nerve and that gut-brain axis that we like to talk about. So without further ado, my darling toaster strudel, would you care to start us off?
Yeah, there's a lot of different angles we could go from here, but, when you're thinking about nervous system health, you almost have to think about what's going to create a resilient body, typically is going to help the nervous system. And the nervous system, like you said, so pivotal in gut function. And most people know this too, but they hear it with like, oh, the brain gut axis. And again, I know we've talked about this before, but I tend to think and tend to see that a lot of people view the brain gut axis from the gut to the brain in that direction. Like everything in my gut is disrupting my brain and my nervous system. And that's what I have to focus on versus dysfunction in the nervous system leading to gut dysfunction. And there is kind of some interlap there.
It's very much a two-way street.
Right. Like you can't be thinking about this as just a one-way thing.
If I heal my gut,
right,
that will magically heal my brain. Right.
Or, and again, I see that more so with people that might have anxiety or depression or
brain fog,
cognitive issues, memory issues, where they say, okay, I just have to get rid of this hydrogen sulfide problem and all these things will go away. And again, maybe that's a component. Who am I to say that it's not at all? But again, typically what we both see is that a lot of times people are ignoring breakdowns or deficiency areas maybe in their nervous system or things that might affect their nervous system. They have gaps in their approach that would be nervous system helpful. And it really impacts their ability to move forward. So again, definitely just remembering that this is a two-way street and thinking of it just that, okay, if I get my microbiome squared away, all my nervous system issues will go away. I would rethink that if that's a mentality you've been stuck in.
And I think we've shared in previous episodes, I have seen a few fluky cases where somebody had anxiety, we did something for their gut, and then miraculously the anxiety melted away. I'm not saying that that can't happen, but in all the years I've been doing this and all the people I've worked with and all the gut stuff I've done, I've only seen that happen maybe like 3 times.
Yeah.
Usually it's more complicated than that. And you have to basically end up treating both. And again, this goes back to what we've said before. One of the foundational problems that we see people running into is that there's this temptation to hyper focus on the gut. And everything is about the microbiome, the leaky gut, the candida, the motility, the enzymes, the HCl, the short chain fatty acids, the whatever. And people just zoom in on the gut so much that it's like they're wearing blinders and they forget about nutrition and hormones and blood sugar. And you get tunnel vision focusing on the gut so much. And honestly, not to pick on all of us, but when we fall into that trap, we are no better than the conventional medical doctors.
Yeah.
Honestly,
I agree.
What's the difference if you go to a naturopath or a functional doctor and have them hyper focus on the gut and ignore everything else? but they're doing it with natural therapeutics like herbs, what is really the difference between that versus going to a GI doctor who doesn't know anything about the rest of your body and only hones in on the gut? Right? Like potato at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it keeps you stuck because you only have, because of the horse blinders, you only have eyes on certain strategies. So what are the strategies you can use if you're solely focused on the microbiome? Clearing, maybe again some like probiotics. Like there might be some different things in there that you could use. But if you're primarily just focusing on the microbiome, the amount of strategies you can use is so narrow when there's so many other levers that you can pull on and that you can find success with. But again, because people are so stuck on the microbiome piece of it, they're using the same strategies and getting no results as well, or getting very limited results. And they're stuck more so on a hamster wheel, trying to manipulate the microbiome a whole bunch and then just feeling
Not making
stuck.
headway.
Right.
Well, and I will say, this is a double-edged sword, I think.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, you said, if you're just focusing on one body part, your toolbox narrows, right? You only have so many things that you could do within the gut, and you're limiting the tools that you can use. Mm-hmm. But that also might be part of the appeal. And this is probably a big reason why people fall into this trap.
Right.
Because when you embark on a healing journey, you feel so overwhelmed. Like, oh my God, there's 8 million herbs, 8 million different diets, 800 different types of meditation and yoga, and 5 gajillion types of apps that I could use, and like 900,000 Facebook groups I could join. And it does feel like progress to narrow it down and say, okay, I'm still overwhelmed, but instead of 8 million of this one thing, now I'm limited to 2,000. And that feels more doable and more manageable. So I do understand how people get into this trap, and it's understandable. But from what we have seen, it's almost never serving you to stay hyper-focused on the gut all by itself. So that's where this episode comes in, and a lot of our other episodes for that matter. We certainly have our fair share of episodes about candida and leaky gut and the microbiome, but a lot of our episodes on this podcast are focused on zooming out and acknowledging all the other parts of your body that are influencing your gut so that you can feel better and you can heal just overall as a human, instead of focusing on heal your gut, heal your gut, heal your gut. So going back to today's topic, you could just zoom way out. And for this episode, we want to talk about, what would a neuron need to be happy? It doesn't matter if it's a neuron that's part of your vagus nerve or your cerebellum or the apparatus in your inner ear or your eyeball. Doesn't matter. What do neurons need to be healthy and happy, period? And then automatically the things that we talk about today are not only going to influence the vagus nerve and the gut-brain axis and the enteric nervous system, all the sexy stuff that you guys want to talk about, but it's also going to promote nervous system health overall. So for the people who do have, some vertigo or, migraines or chronic pain or whatever it might be, it might also help those things, because these things we're going to talk about, they're really just helping the nervous system function at its best and be as healthy as it can be. So if we were to pluck out a neuron out of your brain or spinal cord or whatever, if we put it in a petri dish and we were studying what we needed to give that neuron to keep it alive, Amy, you want to start us off with one that comes to mind? Like, what would that poor little neuron in the petri dish need to stay alive?
Well, you need glucose. As much as the keto folks tout that, like, oh, I could survive off ketones. And it's not necessarily that they're saying that you can only survive off ketones, because even if you eat a low carb diet, your body's still going to maintain blood sugar levels. You're just going to have to make glucose, not get it from your diet. So that was a little bit of a side tangent. But you do need glucose to keep neurons healthy. They need blood sugar. If you don't have enough blood sugar in your blood, you will die, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I hate to break that horrific news for you. That's why we have so many mechanisms to maintain blood sugar. And some mechanisms might be better at regulating it and keeping it at certain levels than others, but I do think glucose is really, really important. Now, if you get too low, if you get too high, that can be problematic for the nervous system in a bunch of ways. For instance, in particular, if you get too high from a blood sugar standpoint, the neurons don't really need insulin to let glucose in. So, like other cells, insulin is a hormone. It opens up the cells to let the glucose in, so it regulates what's going in and out. Now, for neurons, because glucose is so important, it basically allows glucose to come in without insulin. Now, that's great when your blood sugar is balanced, but if your blood sugar isn't balanced and you're being flooded with a bunch of glucose, it can be really inflammatory to the neurons, and it can lead to nerve issues, which from a gut standpoint, I mean, one of the most prominent, more extreme examples of this would be like someone that has diabetes. It's known that if you have diabetes, that gastroparesis is really common. Gastroparesis is delayed stomach emptying. So if you have diabetes and your blood sugar is consistently like going higher than 140 after a lot of your meals, usually higher, much higher than that, if it's uncontrolled, then it starts to damage the nerves and inflame the nerves in the stomach and leading to, poor stomach emptying. But
which
that
is a
can
variation of poor motility. Like
Right.
here, the IBS of the SIBO world is talking about motility so much, which is great. I think that's one of the foundational issues in those conditions.
Right.
But gastroparesis, delayed stomach emptying, that is basically slow motility of the stomach, if you think about it that way. And I just want to throw out there too, I know, sorry I interrupted you, but they've also shown that diabetics have smaller vagus nerves than non-diabetics.
Yeah.
So the girth of your vagus nerve shrinks down much. I forget what it is. It's like 50% smaller than non-diabetics. It's a huge difference. And that is probably related to the motility issues, the higher incidence of gastroparesis, the higher incidence of SIBO and IBS. And
Right.
it's a diabetic autonomic neuropathy. That's a known thing that happens with uncontrolled high blood sugar. So
Right.
yeah, it's really, really, really important to not let your blood sugar go too high or too low very frequently. Now, again, like we all live a life and life is short. We're, we could all be hit by a bus tomorrow. We don't know. So, and that sounds depressing.
I just spit a little bit.
I'm glad you shared. Thank you.
No, I'm just like,
But I guess my point is not to be depressing, but I'm going to live every life like it's my last, but I'm also going to live a life where I plan on being around for a long time, if
Right.
that makes sense. So, if I go to a wedding and they have cake that I could eat, you bet your ass I'm going to eat a piece of cake. Or if my family wants to go out for ice cream, like I will get the ice cream. So I'm not saying that I'm personally in the camp of sugar is evil, no sugar, no carbs, never, ever, ever. I don't think that is serving a lot of us with the current trend with like keto and carnivore and all of that. But, treat treats as treats, in the words of Michael Pollan. Ice cream shouldn't be an everyday thing. It should be a treat that you have every now and then.
right. Well, and I mean, I think it becomes a situation where if 50% of your diet or calories, I should say, is sugar, you're not getting enough nutrition, which then could lead to more calorie density too. It could lead to kind of more inflammation, could lead to more blood sugar instability. Now, if someone typically has decent blood sugar stability, I don't think having the ice cream is really going to make a huge difference. Again, maybe you're like swinging 10 or 15 points higher or something, but it's so interesting you bring up like the carb situation because my blood sugar was never worse than when I was eating low carb. So just like throwing that out there, sometimes carbs are not going to be the answer. I think that another big piece of it is just calories as well. Like if calories are low, blood sugar tends to swing with my clients. And I know we were talking about like diabetes in particular, but blood sugar swings are so common, like not diabetes. I've had some clients with outright pre-diabetic markers like on labs. So maybe their A1C is like 5.8 or something. And we do some more investigation. And it does seem like that's an accurate reading of about where their average glucose is falling. So again, sometimes I'll see like pre-diabetes markers, but a lot of my clients don't have outright lab markers that are wildly out of balance when blood sugar is at play. But, you know, it still could be affecting the nervous system if you're having big swings or you're dipping even low, because hypoglycemia can be really problematic too.
Yeah, hypoglycemia is bad too. It's all
Yeah.
of the like, so for me, I will get kind of a mild, dull headache if I get really hypoglycemic. I know I might have shared this. So when I was trying to get back into fasting after taking a bit of a hiatus, one of the times I got through the first day and I felt fine. But then I tried to go to sleep and I slept like absolute crap.
Right.
I was tossing and turning literally every 10 minutes. I was flopping over in bed and I was super awake and just, I couldn't sleep. And after a few hours of doing that, and I think I even took some melatonin, if I remember correctly, and I still was not sleeping. And I finally
Right.
got up at like 1 or 2 a.m. and I was like, all right, Uncle,
Right.
I get it. And I went in the kitchen and I made myself a giant full meal. I made like 4 eggs, 2 pieces of toast, avocado, I don't even know what. But I ate a full big meal, stayed up for maybe half an hour just so I could stay upright for a little bit. And then I went back to bed and I slept like a freaking baby. So,
Right.
but if you think about this, disrupted sleep, brain fog, headaches, fatigue, these symptoms of hypoglycemia are all because the nervous system is freaking out because you don't have blood sugar.
Yeah.
I'm
For sure.
You know, I'm not saying that the hypoglycemia caused a rash or
Right.
caused, I don't even know like where I'm going with this, but you know, all of those symptoms that I rattled off are very nervous system oriented in nature. And it's because it's your nervous system screaming, for the love of God, please give us some blood glucose.
Well, yeah, and I know we've been talking about lately more privately about how I really hypothesize a lot of my postpartum anxiety OCD issues. I don't know if they're wholly related to blood sugar, but like if my blood sugar is not stable, my anxiety is way higher. And I've seen that with clients too. I've had one client's coming to me in particular, and she was saying she was getting panic attacks like early in the morning, like 2, 3 a.m., where then she can't sleep. Like, again, like she was having really weird early morning symptoms. And right out the gate, I was like, this sounds, if you're waking up in like an anxious state, this sounds like a blood sugar stability problem. And so we did a little bit of tracking, and turns out she was going really low at those time periods, like in the 60s, 50s. So she was dipping really low blood sugar wise. So again, it's really interesting. I think there can even be some mental health things that come up when blood sugar becomes really dysregulated. Now, again, like I don't know if it creates an issue out of nowhere, but it definitely exacerbates pre-existing. Like I run a little more anxious. I think everyone has like a particular mood that they run in if they're dysregulated. Some people it's more irritated or angry. Some people it's more depressed. Some people it's more like apathetic. Some people it's more anxious. So, you know, I think when I'm dysregulated blood sugar wise, I definitely have a lot more anxiety. And I've seen it really clear as day this postpartum period. And a lot of times it just like would sneak up on me. But yeah, I think that blood sugar too, another sign Not that it's wholly this, but I do think it can lead to kind of more panicky and anxiousness, on edgeness for some people if their blood sugar is swinging pretty heavily. So,
No,
yeah.
I agree. And I shared with you recently when we were conversing back and forth off screen that a friend of mine noticed this too, that she discovered this on like a Mark Hyman podcast and started really evaluating what was happening around her when she started to feel a panic attack coming on. And she was able to halt a few of them in their tracks by eating.
Yeah.
And it was working really well for her. So I do think, like we've talked about before, a lot of times health is a pie chart, and we're just going along trying to figure out what is the biggest slice of the pie, what is a medium slice of pie, and what are the little tiny slivers that you could work on, but they're probably not going to change the pie chart all that much.
Right.
Right? Like, would you want to focus on the thing that's 26% of the pie chart? Or would you rather focus on the thing that's like 2% of the pie chart?
Right.
Obviously, the bigger slice of the pie is where it's at. So, how big the slice is for you and your nervous system is up for grabs.
Right.
But we're just here to tell you that blood sugar problems, whether you're swinging too high or too low or both, they definitely disrupt the nervous system and therefore have the potential to disrupt the gut-brain axis and the vagus nerve. So you gotta work on that in whatever way you can.
Yeah, and it's so one other point, and you definitely alluded to this, but I just want to make sure that everyone understands this. Just historically, when I work with clients that have crazy appetite swings, so like big waves of hunger, feeling kind of lightheaded between meals, a lot of fatigue, just chronic fatigue across the day, swings, like energy swings, that kind of thing. A lot of times people will say, it's my gut, like it's my gut issue. I would say 8 times, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be blood sugar related, or again, like nutrition related in some way. Again, very, very rarely, I would say like energy crashing is specifically gut related, although it's really commonly associated with gut stuff. It just tends to be a symptom that gets blamed on gut stuff when I think it's largely other things. And blood sugar issues is a huge part of energy swings throughout the day and just not feeling stable. Like you should have typically, again, if everything's running smoothly metabolically, you should pretty much have a fairly even energy level throughout the day. That doesn't necessarily mean that like it's totally even. Or again, the appetite's totally even, because it's natural to be hungry before a meal. But again, like if you notice that you're like just ravenous, or like you just ate and you're ravenous and things like that, and you have a lot of these energy swings, again, I would first and foremost try to assess your diet before thinking it's a microbiome issue.
I agree. I think you're right. I think that is a symptom that people oftentimes attribute to the microbiome. Incorrectly so. Now, are there going to be those situations where somebody has an overt food sensitivity,
right,
or, a reaction to a specific food and it causes brain fog by a different mechanism? Sure. But I think by far and large, 90% plus, if you're reporting that you just totally crash after a meal, it's some combination of, it's blood sugar usually, but is it because you ate too many carbs, or is it because you didn't balance the meal with enough fat or protein or fiber? Is it because you ate a bunch of carbs and then you sat on your butt right afterwards? That's something I've noticed with myself. I love going to seminars and conferences, and, sometimes they'll have food at the events, which is great. But I kind of chuckle because, and like not in a judgmental, bitchy way. Like I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I just kind of observe neutrally, and I notice, I'm trying to emphasize, the meat and the veggies, and I don't do a big portion of carbs usually because I'm in a I'm in learning mode. I'm there to learn. That's my top priority. And I want to make sure that I don't crash if I'm sitting in that lecture hall. Well, then sometimes I witness the people around me and they're getting the rolls with their lunch, and then they get the big old brownie or whatever with the dessert. And then they're going and they're sitting on their butt in the lecture hall, and half of them are falling asleep. And I'm like, guys, you just, so, again, are you eating too much sugary, carby junk? Are you not balancing it with enough protein and fat and fiber? Are you sitting on your butt? I've gotten in the habit of standing on the edge of the room in a lot of lectures that I attend. I just stand and I kind of do some very like subtle, light, like up, down on my toes, like little calf raises or little wall sits or something. But I try to stay upright and move around a little bit, especially after lunch, because I don't know, humans are just prone to crashing and burning if you eat a bunch of carbs and then you sit on your butt after that. And I don't know if that's pathological or something that needs to be treated necessarily. It's just like you can make more informed lifestyle choices and dietary choices and prevent that sort of thing from happening, usually. So anyway, off my high horse.
The only other thing I will say is that sometimes when I see people adding carbs in while calories are low, that can often lead to blood sugar swings too. I think that you have a really hard time maintaining blood sugar stability if calories are low. Now, again, that's not to say if you need carbs to not add them in, but like it can be a little bit of a transitional period for your body to adapt to higher carbs.
That's a good point.
So, yeah, I think we covered the blood sugar thing for the most part. Do you think that there's anything else? I know we have full episodes on this, so
we do. I was going to say that too. We have a hypoglycemia and a hyperglycemia episode back in season 1. I forget what numbers those would have been.
It's maybe in like the middle? 50 to 70, maybe.
Yeah, like middle of season 1, I would say. So definitely go check those out if you want more of a conversation around this. But I want to move on to probably the number 2 biggest deal breaker for neuron health. So again, we've got that little neuron in a petri dish and we're just trying to keep it alive. What else does it need? The other big foundational crucial thing beyond blood sugar is it needs oxygen. You can't put that little sucker in a vacuum and think that it's going to live. It needs oxygen delivery and it needs waste to be taken away. And that basically boils down to you need to not be anemic, really is the big one.
Right.
So looking out for things like iron deficiency and anemia, get a CBC. I like to get a CBC and a ferritin on myself at least once, if not twice a year.
Right.
Just for funsies, just to make sure everything is running smoothly. But, in addition to iron deficiency anemia, there's also B vitamin deficiency anemias. Both of them are unfortunately going to be more common in strongly plant-based eaters like vegetarians and vegans because they're not going to get as much iron or B12 typically. And I say that as somebody who was a vegetarian for a lot of years, so no judgment, no hate. But also there's this other world too. You want to have enough red blood cells and you want the red blood cells to have hemoglobin. So that's the anemia conversation. You also want to have adequate blood pressure and control of blood pressure. And you want to have adequate perfusion of that blood into the tissues so that you're physically pushing that oxygenated blood where it needs to go. So that also brings up this whole other world of like people who have dysautonomia issues. Well, now the dysautonomia is flared up because of the low oxygen state of their tissues, potentially, the hypoxia. But then the fact that they're hypoxic means that their nervous system's not going to work well, and then their nervous system's not going to control their blood pressure well. And it's this vicious catch-22. But yeah, I wanted to share that that's a piece of it too. But that's where I think things like exercise can help a lot. And again, physically pushing the blood into your brain. So that's a consideration too, but maybe let's focus more on the anemia side because that's far more common and bigger of an issue.
I will say though, like, I feel like I work with a lot of people that do have lower blood pressure. Like, again, I think from a cultural standpoint, we see a lot of people with like, oh, you have high blood pressure. But I think the low pressure more so comes as a side effect to maybe suboptimal eating and weight loss. So if you've had a lot of weight loss, it can lead to, I think, worse blood pressure. And again, I don't know if I've necessarily researched that, but I would say that is sort of what I've observed. I think I see a lot of like cold hands and feet, which doesn't necessarily always yield blood pressure things, but I think again, like for some people it can. I know like when I was going through my gut journey, I had really cold hands and feet and that got better. When things got a little bit better for me, like that wasn't my baseline, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That was just one of many symptoms that you were experiencing.
Right. So it's interesting. But yeah, I think from a hemoglobin, like a blood oxygen standpoint, like you said, the iron thing's just so huge. And again, there's a client I have right now who this lady, we had worked together previous, like not for an overwhelmingly long period of time. And again, like some of the stuff we had done had helped. And then and this was maybe 3 years ago or something. And then we regrouped more recently, like maybe in the last 4 months or so. And she had went and worked with some other group, for a period of time and then came back and like she was asking about labs and stuff. And I was like, let's not do anything gut focused. You've done it all and we don't need to do anything else. But it would be really interesting to do really comprehensive blood work for you. So I sent her all these Ulta Lab links, and we ended up probably spending $400 or $500 on blood labs because she had crazy fatigue. She has had fatigue issues and stuff like that. So I wanted to look at her iron and stuff. Her ferritin was 6. Yeah, super low. So we're now working on getting the iron up. She says she literally feels like a person again. Like that's the best way she can like say to describe it. She's like, and it had only been like 4 weeks of being on the iron. Like it wasn't even, every time we talk, every 2 or 3 weeks we talk, each time is getting better and better. And I keep saying it's going to take probably some time to build up some of those levels. But yeah, it's crazy how much iron really turns the lights on, for a number of ways, not just from a nervous system standpoint, but it's some of the craziest cases I've seen, where iron has helped. There's another lady who that's pretty much all we did because we saw her iron was low and we implemented that right away. So we threw an iron right out the gate and that was like the main thing that worked. We did a few other things, but again, she was just basically like, oh, getting my iron up fixed my digestion, not just like fatigue or stuff like that. She worked on getting her iron up and it literally fixed her gut issues. It's crazy.
Because everything is connected.
Right.
Like and this is again, case in point, you can't just focus on the gut and expect the gut to heal.
Right.
We similarly, I remember I had this case, and the woman was mostly coming in to work with me on like bloating, constipation type stuff. And she also, if I remember correctly, had a bit of reflux and she was pretty fatigued, but she and her husband, they have like 9 children and she homeschools and runs the household. I know. And we kind of joked, and like I had worked with her husband previously, so I'd already met her numerous times, but we kind of joked at the beginning, like, well, of course you're tired, man. You have 9 children and you're homeschooling them all. I don't know how you're still standing. But then we ran her blood work. Again, basic blood work, like CBC, ferritin kind of stuff. Her hemoglobin was like 6.5.
What?
I know.
Oh my God. Did
for
you
reference people, normal for women, if you follow the LabCorp range, LabCorp says Normal is anything above 11.1. From a functional perspective, I like hemoglobin to be above 12.5 for women. So 6.5 is, honest to God, I called her on a weekend to tell her, and I told her, I was like, I'm so sorry, but I need to insist that you and your husband get in the car right now
Oh
and
my
go to the
God.
emergency room because we need to make sure that you don't have a GI bleed. Like, we didn't know, is this something
Right.
you've been living with, or is this
Right.
something acute that's just happening? And they, they ended up saying, no, there's no acute bleed. You're fine. Go home. And they didn't transfuse her or infuse her or anything.
Right.
But I was like, A, we need to make sure this is not an acute bleed. And B,
Right.
you might need an iron infusion, honest to
Right.
God. And yeah, we plucked away at it for a good long while. Now, granted, this woman had been on omeprazole, a PPI, for about 10 years.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah, so among the many things going wrong, it's like, well, that's probably a big part of why you tanked your iron.
Right.
So it took months and months of diligently working on that iron. But I remember she got her hemoglobin up to like 10, which still
Right.
sucks, but it doesn't suck as bad.
Right.
And she was like, oh my God, I have energy to do things. And I'm like, you're going to be running triathlons by the time you
Right.
get up to normal hemoglobin levels.
Right.
Like, this is
Right.
nuts.
Right. It's kind of like a weird, not healthy form of like altitude training where
Yes.
you're training your body to function off like zero energy. And then once you actually get your energy restored, you think that you can do anything. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and what people don't realize too, another element to the importance of oxygen delivery and not becoming anemic. The thing is too, that's a very inflammatory state for the body to be in.
Right.
So the tissues just won't work. That's
Right.
one part of it. So like the tissues need oxygen delivery, they need waste materials to be taken away from the cells. So there's that element. But also, when the tissues are hypoxic, which means there's not enough oxygen, you get this, I don't know what to call it, transcription factor. There's this molecule in the body that starts to get turned on called HIF-1 alpha. And it's basically a big bonko inflammatory mediator, and it gets turned on in states of hypoxia. So now you've got
Right.
the double whammy potentially of, oh, the tissues just don't work so good because they don't have the oxygen to run themselves and
Right.
work. But also now you're inflamed and you've
Right.
got that double whammy. So it's so critically important. And I've seen research that upwards of like 50% of people with IBS and IBD both, like 50% or more, are iron deficient, if not overtly anemic.
Yeah.
This is so common.
Yeah.
It's so common. But I want to ask your opinion, oh dietitian of mine. I have an opinion, and I'm 99.99999% sure you're going to agree with this opinion. But
Okay, hit me.
I want the people to hear it from the RD anyway. Say somebody does realize that they're iron deficient. Do they just jump right into a supplement, or maybe should they look at their diet and think about inadequate intake? And like, do you immediately panic and think, oh my God, I have malabsorption?
Okay. I don't think you should panic and think you have malabsorption. I would say, or the SIBO is not eating your iron half the time. Again, like that's usually what people think.
That's the internet scaring the bejesus out of you.
Definitely assessing intake would be important. A lot of people that do develop low iron might not be eating a lot of red meat, might not be eating a lot of very bioavailable sources of iron. I think in terms of what to do, it probably really depends on what the level of iron deficiency it is. I typically, as a rule of thumb, if someone has a ferritin below 30, depending again like on what their symptomology is and in their openness to add stuff to the diet, but usually if it's under 30, I think it's a little bit harder to increase dietarily. Now, it doesn't mean it can't be done if ferritin's under 30. But it can be a little more challenging. So sometimes I will incorporate some sort of supplement, but with the caveat being, you should probably incorporate some sources of iron into your diet right now while you're supplementing and building your iron up so that you have some habits formed. And you're doing some things that will help add iron to the diet in general, but that you have the habits formed ongoing to include some of these things in your diet. Now, I think if someone's mildly deficient, maybe a little suboptimal, I definitely would not choose to supplement in that particular case. So like if someone had ferritin that was like maybe in the 30s or something, but not really overly
like 30, 40, 50.
Right, problematic, then I probably would not supplement. So yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting one. And then B12 and folate are also going to be important in preventing anemia. And B12 again has a lot of different functions from a nervous system standpoint. It's really going to be really important for keeping nerves healthy. So again, making sure that those things are looking okay too. Again, these are usually labs that most doctors don't care to run either. You know, if you just want to get like a B12 run, or if you want a little bit more advanced look, get like a methylmalonic acid run by your doctor. Again, some of these labs too, like if you're concerned that your doctor might be a little finicky, which again, I'd hope that you have a doctor that you trust somewhat to like ask for B12 or folate, but printing out the LabCorp IDs for some of these tests, I think can be really helpful, because a lot of times it's just, if they don't run it very often, they can be kind of lazy. And
yeah,
like,
they just don't know how to order it. They don't know the number or the code or whatever.
Right. So again, my doctor, I love this. He has a whole sheet, and I think it has the code, but then they use it so often and he just checks what he wants to run. It's kind of crazy.
It depends on the EMR too, because my EMR, I can type in the name of the thing and it'll auto-populate with the options. So if I type in, CBC, it'll populate with, do you want the CBC with differential, without differential, with platelet, without platelet? So yeah, probably different systems are a bit different. But yeah, sometimes they just don't know the code and they don't want to look it up, and they've had like 43 other patients that day and they're just like, no. It's easier to say no. But yeah, even honestly, I've had some people get captured on a crappy old serum B12 that still does catch some people with B12 issues.
Right.
And, and just a simple folate measurement. So definitely, if you think that that's relevant for you. And again, added bonus, if you want to look in something like Chronometer, track your nutrition a bit. If you notice that you're chronically undershooting B12, folate, or iron, and you collect data on yourself for a couple days or maybe a week, and it's like, oh, I got all of my B12 one day in the whole week. Holy crap. You could just do something about it without the labs, or that might be additional useful information to convince your doctor, like, oh, I didn't just Google it or hear it on a podcast.
Right.
The irony. I actually thought about this critically, and I did a little bit of homework, and it turns out I am probably not eating enough of this, but I kind of want to check in on a number just to get a baseline of where I'm at. I think that also goes a long way. But yeah, in this sense, iron is probably king. I like also, as a side note, that you specifically mentioned bioavailable iron and nutrients, because that's something I've run into with vegans before. And again, guys, I was a vegetarian for 11 years. So I don't want to see no hate comments down in the YouTubes on this video, okay? I'm not being a meaty pie. But the thing is, I have seen vegan clients where we run, like I remember this one woman, we ran her labs and her ferritin was like 28 or 30 or something like that. And then looking at her chronometer data, she was getting like 150% of her daily value of iron. It was like, okay.
Yeah.
So we typically I'll go over the food diary chronometer data on the first appointment, and then we'll order the labs, and then we'll talk about the labs on day 2. So seeing that, I was like, yeah, your iron actually might not be too bad when we run it. Let's find out. Well, then we got the ferritin back, and it was kind of like, ugh, not the greatest. And I remember we had this whole conversation, and it was very frustrating because it's a very well-known thing in the nutrition science world that heme iron found in meat and seafood, like animal-based iron, is much more bioavailable. And I don't know if you remember the stats from school. Is it like 30% more bioavailable or 40%?
I think it's like 1.8 times.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
like, I think it's, and again, you have to imagine too, they actually call it, I'm going to look it up right now, but I'm pretty sure they call it a meat factor. Like there's actually, that was the term used. Well, that was the term used to describe why it's so much more bioavailable.
Okay.
But again, like
point being, so she's getting all of her iron from spinach and, hummus and whatever else. And on paper, it might look like you're doing a really great job with your iron, but if you know that that's primarily coming from plant-based sources, again, I don't want you guys to go take to the internet and be like, oh my God, I have malabsorption. I'm doomed forever. Oh no. Right. No, it just might be that you're eating a less bioavailable form of the nutrient. And this is where, we've said it once, we'll say it 1,000 times, omnivore diet is superior. Eat a bit of everything. No food, including sugar, is 100% evil. You can eat everything in moderation. We need to get out of this like dogmatic, food fear, eating disordery, riddled view of nutrition where we're constantly debating the good food and the bad food. And we just need to get back to eating like humans. You don't have to live on kale smoothies for the rest of your life. You can have a burger. It's fine.
Yeah. I think the other thing to consider maybe too, I know you had mentioned it, is just inflammation in general. From a nervous system standpoint, which again, like, I think making sure your body is nourished is going to combat inflammation. If you aren't getting things that are going to be helpful in regulating inflammation, like amino acids that make glutathione, for instance, or again, like antioxidant nutrients.
Vitamin C, vitamin E.
Exactly. If you aren't getting some of those things, it certainly could affect your nervous system negatively because nerves really don't like inflammation. So, that's something to consider too. So overall nutrition across the board, because it can help make sure that you're getting some of those key nutrients in. Now, there could also be a little bit of nuance there if you were going to say microbiome playing a part. Like if you did have something that was producing a lot of LPS or like really high amounts of hydrogen sulfide or something that was driving up inflammation, it could be affecting the nervous system. That could be a component of helping your nervous system health. Maybe it's like 10% of the picture or something. So addressing that makes sense. And then I think sometimes reducing things that could drive inflammation, which would be a lot of lifestyle stuff. Working out is generally going to have a hormetic effect to lower inflammation. Getting enough sleep, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But even just reducing some of the toxins, you don't have to drive yourself crazy, but, being somewhat cognizant of products you're using, that kind of stuff might be something to consider too. I know like environmental toxins could be at play for some people. So like inflammation in general, certain foods too, like if you're more from an autoimmune standpoint, like if you react to gluten, if you're celiac, like I wouldn't eat gluten. That would probably be pretty catastrophic for the nervous system. Not that anyone would really do that, but
no, well, or even other autoimmune stuff. Like my mom doesn't have celiac disease that we're aware of.
Right.
But she has kind of early rheumatoid arthritis. It's totally in remission and totally fine as long as she stays away from gluten. But the
Right.
minute she gets glutenated, that knuckle starts to really kill her again. And then we'll look back at the previous day or so and be like, oh, did you get exposed to gluten? And every single time she's had a flare, she's realized, oh, yeah, I went out to that restaurant, or I went to a potluck, or I
Right.
went to a something, and I must have gotten glutenated. So,
Right.
yeah, that's a great example. I think just living an anti-inflammatory lifestyle
Right.
really just ends up being healthy. Like,
Right.
if,
Right.
if
Healthy
you,
across the board for the nervous
yeah,
system
like
as well.
if somebody were to call you like a health nut, what sorts of things might maybe you would
Right.
like a health nut person might try to eat more whole food, and
Right.
maybe they'll even try to like grow a little bit of their own food and like have that relationship with their food,
Right.
and just making healthier choices, swapping out the
Right.
paraben and phthalate riddled lotion for something that's a little bit cleaner,
Right.
or you get the idea, like not using perfume and chemical scents all the time, and like dryer
Right, like
sheets
even
and
limiting them. Like if there's even
yeah.
a product that's like more conventional that you really like and makes your hair look really good or something, use it maybe more on special occasions than every day.
I have one
Like,
friend, she is pretty clean otherwise, but she refuses to get rid of her Bath and Body Works foaming hand soaps. Hashtag
right.
not sponsored.
Yeah.
But like, they
Right.
smell lovely, and that's just a little, you use them a couple times a day, and I don't know, man.
Right.
Like, I'm not going to be the jerk friend who's like, no, you must get rid of all toxins. Meh.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, I think just trying to lead a healthy life, but also not doing it in these big, grand spurts, right?
Right.
So many times, and this happened long before the internet, right? Because we had like the Jenny Craig and South Beach diet
It
books
was a little more
and
contained.
Suzanne
It was less of like
Summers,
a
and yeah, like I've had patients who said that they self-diagnosed themselves with candida and did a candida cleanse back in the 80s. So I know
yeah.
that this predates the internet somewhat, but especially the internet fuels this idea that you could radically change your life and do a
Right.
cleanse and do a Whole30 and do a liver detox, and it's going to be great, and you're going to be a new person in 30 days. Wow, hooray. And then it's really hard, and you miss chocolate, or you
Right.
miss hanging out with your friends, or whatever it might be, and you just spectacularly crash and burn after the stupid Whole30 that you did. So
Yeah.
I think the bigger
Yeah.
thing too is just making these changes bit by bit and trying to fold them in a way that is sustainable for you, so that you can keep this up for the rest of your life.
Right. I wholeheartedly agree.
Oh, goodness gracious. You touched on what? So I think the two that we just talked about are the two that are going to be much more nutritionally and like biochemically geared for this conversation. The other ones, we could probably keep the conversation a little bit shorter, that we had might at least. But
Right.
which one do you want? You mentioned one already. Do you want to go there next? Do you remember which one?
Sleep or movement? Either of those?
Yeah, you had mentioned sleep already, so I was thinking sleep next.
Yeah, no, that would be great. Yeah. We should talk about sleep.
It's
I
important,
think
guys.
again, sleep,
I don't know what to tell you.
you can't wait till you're dead. You're not gonna have, I don't know how to word that. You're gonna
Yeah.
live better if you don't wait to sleep when you're dead. I feel like there's that mindset of, oh, I can just stay up a little bit later. I feel like sleep's always the first shoe to drop for people a lot of times. Everyone has, in terms of working with people, I've sort of noticed that of the 4 key lifestyle areas in my mind, so like nutrition, movement, sleep, stress management, everyone has at least one Achilles heel in the 4 typically.
Absolutely.
Sometimes it's multiple, but again, sometimes it's movement. They just have not been someone that moves. Sometimes it's sleep. But again, I think culturally we don't really value sleep or stress management as much. So
I agree. I think it's all about the grind.
Right.
And again, I
right.
can sleep when I'm dead kind of mentality.
Right. Like you're almost hero worshipped in a weird way if you're like
Yeah.
pulled an all-nighter or something, you
Yeah.
know. So it's strange, but yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to just giving your body time to take out the trash, so to speak, and to rest and like recalibrate, I mean, could you just like imagine the amount of information your brain is doing during the day and how it has to like recalibrate at
Yeah, and
night?
just how stimulated it is at all
Right.
times.
Right. So, you know, just thinking of it in that way, sleep is super important to give your brain and your nervous system a rest so that it can function optimally. Now, if it doesn't get all the rest it needs, a lot of things terrible happen, I feel like, if sleep really starts to slide. And, you know, I'll talk to people all the time where they're like, oh, yeah, for me, 6 hours is okay. And I'm like,
No, it's not.
all right. I think in the
That's
research,
denial.
right. Well, in the research, I think there's like, 2 or 3% of people or something that can like function okay on less than 6 hours of sleep. But again, you don't want to take the chance that you're in the 97% and just, hope banking that you're in the 3% thinking that you're doing well, because you are exhibiting gut symptoms or else we wouldn't be working together. So, but yeah, sleep is a big one, and it can be, if certain patterns are really entrenched, it can be something that takes some time to unwind. And I would not like say you have to go from going to bed at 1 a.m. every night to 10 p.m. in one foul swoop. Start by like dropping about by 15 and 30 minutes each week until you can kind of get to a more solidified bedtime, or try to just kind of solidify a bedtime routine. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you could work on sleep, but super critical, I think, from a nervous system standpoint.
It is. And I think that what you just described, like going from going to bed at 1 a.m. down to 10
Right.
or whatever, that's the equivalent of doing a Whole30.
Right.
Or a cleanse or a detox, right? Is I'm going to radically change my life and I'm going to be magically healthy in 30 days. Oh my God. And it's the same kind of energy of, I don't want to really change my ways. I just want to like wave this magic wand the one
Right.
time and magically fix everything. And
Right. It's
like,
not
we're all human.
sustainable.
We all have that brain lesion, guys. It's okay.
Right.
But I like what you said about working your way back gradually. I think in my finding, the sleep conversation takes on one of 3 flavors. There are the atypical people. The smallest cohort are the people who actually have good sleep hygiene and they actually get enough sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just had one of those this week. New patient. And that was one thing where I was like, you're kicking ass. And I gave her a high five through the webcam and she laughed. But, she's really good about her bedtime routine. She has a nice relaxing bath and unwinds, and she goes to bed religiously at the same time every night. And it's just really solid. Then I think the other 2 groups are like 2 halves of the same coin. I think the other group is the people who don't get enough sleep, right? So the unicorns are the people who do get enough sleep. Of the people who don't get enough sleep, I find that there are some people who are just so oblivious or in
Right.
denial, right? Those are the people who are like, well, I could get by with 6 hours. It's like, no, you can't.
Right. Right.
You are not that special, Barbara. You need to
Right.
just get more sleep. So sometimes it's a denial thing. Sometimes they're just oblivious and they
Right.
don't put 2 and 2 together that they're doing that to themselves. I was one of those. Because I was a cool kid. When I went to college, I was super excited to find that my school had an anime club. And so I would go to the anime club and they would put like anime on the big screen in the student union at night. And I would go, a time or 2 or more a week. And I would hang out until all hours of the night in the anime club room, or I would go watch the anime on the big screen. And then I would get home to my dorm at like 1 a.m. And then remember, people, I was a rower, so I had to wake up at 5 a.m. to go to practice.
Oh, God.
But I was living the life in college, man. I
Right.
wanted to have my cake and eat it too. I wanted my anime club and my rowing career.
Right.
And I did that for one semester and I burst into flames. And I was
Yeah.
so exhausted. And I had a come to Jesus moment and realized, okay, I have to be smarter about this. So God knows there's also those people. And these are the people who they're hearing this podcast right now and they're like, whoa, light bulb moment. I'm going to change my ways. And then hopefully we're influencing them. Then there's the other half of the coin, people who don't get enough sleep and they know they don't get enough sleep and they really, really want more sleep. And they maybe have tried a bunch of things and they're still not getting enough sleep.
Right.
That's probably not a conversation for this episode. We do have another episode on sleep, I think. We could probably do an updated one at some point.
Right.
But there are a million gazillion different herbs and strategies and considerations trying to optimize and improve your sleep if you have struggled with that in the past.
Right.
So I didn't want those people to be frustrated where here we are, like, you should get more sleep. And I'm just picturing them sitting at home like, I know. Gosh
Right.
darn it. Tell me how to get more sleep. So
Right.
just acknowledging you people. Sadly, this episode is not designed to cater to that exact question because it's a big topic. But I'm going to put it on the to-do list to do an updated sleep episode for you guys in the semi-near future. So stay tuned for that, okay? I promise we're not forgetting about you. And for the people who are just in denial or oblivious, now you can make the changes because you
Right.
heard this. But you know what it reminded me of, by the way? So I was working on a presentation that I'm doing for one of those like gluten-free expos, the Nourish Festival. And one of the stats that I put in my presentation was there was this article I found, and they said 67% of Americans believe they are getting enough dietary fiber, but only 5% of Americans actually do. Isn't that hilarious?
Good Lord.
67% of people think they're getting enough fiber.
It's probably, though, honest. Well, I mean, like, there's a lot of reasons for this, but do you ever feel like you read labels and they say, oh, good source of protein, and it's like 4 grams? And I'm like, that's not like
Yeah.
a good source of protein. Like, some of the food labels I feel like would be like, good source of fiber, and it's like, maybe it's not terrible,
gram.
but it's not, it's like 2 grams or something.
Yeah.
So sometimes I feel like the packaging can be really disorienting for people because they read all these health benefits they're getting, but I did a whole paper on food marketing in college, and that is a crazy, crazy world. Nothing is regulated, essentially.
Do we want to do an episode about that later on? That would
We
be
honestly should. I should pull up my old
fascinating.
paper because
Yeah.
my teacher was like very impressed by me. He like pulled me aside when I wrote this paper. It was when I was in marketing. So again, like I wasn't even in food. So crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then like the only thing that you really can't do is like outright say that there's like a specific health benefit. But again, there's so many weird, like natural, like there's no regulation of what's natural, on a food label. So that can be kind of an interesting hole.
We're getting Amy all wrapped up. We
Right.
have to derail her before she goes off on a tangent. But no, I would love to do an episode on that. I've read enough, just some books and some general internet stuff. I've never done a full paper on this topic, but that would be a fascinating one to talk about because we're being lied to.
Well,
And
and
it's
it's
legal.
also, there's a lot of very honestly effed up things that they do in the food world where they literally put the sugary, bright colored things in the eyesight of the kids.
Oh,
So it's really messed up. And again, a lot of the money, there's so much money in it. So you even have people like, I remember back in the day, Michelle Obama had this big initiative in schools. And I even remember being in high school and then like our cookies went away and people were like, thanks, Michelle Obama, like blaming Michelle Obama for like getting rid of the cookies. And it's like, okay. Like, again, we were all pissed because we're in high school. And then I think they got rid of certain beverages and things like that. But then again, what ends up happening is you have people with good intentions, but then they like get wrapped up. Who starts sponsoring these healthy eating things? It's like Coca-Cola, Kraft. It's like a lot of these food companies that probably don't have the best foods are doing all the healthy eating initiatives or are sponsoring like registered dietitian things. A lot of the
that's a whole weird one.
the
Like
academy,
McDonald's catering the lunch at the registered dietitian
yeah, exactly.
national symposium or whatever.
Yeah, you have Academy in dietetics. You have the Academy for Dietetics and Nutrition, and the sponsors are like Coke, Kraft, like all these major food companies that are not really producing very nutrient dense food. And it's
Hardly.
again, I'm not like the food police per se, but as a whole, as a culture as a whole, we should not be eating a lot of the foods, especially like Coke. Like, ugh, come on. So
Yeah,
it's follow the money, and even the nutrition space gets very murky with some of the relationships they have.
Yeah.
So
Well, honestly, what you're describing is very analogous to big pharma getting their hooks in with the MDs and the DOs and the medical world. Like I've known people who, I went to college with them or whatever, and they have gone on to get their MD or their DO degree.
Right.
And I remember some of them even posting on Facebook and saying, wow, like internship is the greatest thing because the pharmaceutical reps bring breakfast and lunch and dinner for us every single day. Like I never have to pay for food again because in a lot of these clinics, it's literally scheduled. Like, oh, okay, today the Pfizer rep is going to bring us bagels. And then the Glaxo rep is going to bring us pizza for lunch. And then the such and such rep is going to bring us this for breakfast tomorrow. And it's this scheduled, orchestrated thing in a lot of medical clinics. And, they're buying the favor of the doctor. And when they're there, they just so happen to say like, oh, by the way, Dr. Bob, have you prescribed any Lipitor lately? Oh, is it good? Yeah. And also they get these smoking hot women to be the reps usually. And, you have to be like a supermodel to be a rep. So, there's that version in conventional medicine, but then you get into functional medicine and it's the same thing, but it's the supplement companies and the lab companies.
Right.
Diagnostic Solutions, Genova, Diagnostics, Doctors Data, they're all going to these Apex, Standard Process, whatever. They're all going to every single one of the conferences and seminars and symposiums that your functional doctors and your naturopaths are going to. And if we're not careful, we're going to get sucked in with that. And
it becomes like a weird indoctrination. Like at first it seems, these pharma reps bringing me lunch, like that's a little bit weird, like a conflict of interest. But then it slowly like chips away at the defenses, and people kind of lose their ability to critically think if they have met this person for lunch every month or whatever, and they have a rapport now, and it's like all
friends.
strange. Right. It's all
like
strange.
That pharma rep, she's my friend, and she wouldn't give me a bum steer.
Right.
Anyway, that's a tangent. But I think we could definitely do an episode about this sort of stuff, especially the corruption in the food world. But
even just like how to read label, like we could do like a whole label episode or something. But I think we can move on maybe to movement. Do you want to take it away with some movement? Were you exercise sciences? Was that your major?
I was.
Okay.
Yep.
Former exercise science major. You take it away.
That's right. And I was a personal trainer for a lot of years.
Yeah.
Also.
Hey, look out.
I think I'm going to actually borrow from other training first, though. So there's this adjacent field to my own called functional neurology. Oftentimes it's chiropractors who practice this, so it's sometimes called chiropractic neurology, but it's like the sister field to functional medicine in a lot of ways, where functional medicine is looking at the chemical makeup of the body. Typically, the functional neurology world is assessing neurological pathways and then developing like a rehab plan for your neurons. So like, this side of your cerebellum isn't doing so hot, so we're going to stimulate that side more than the other, that sort of thing. And I really liked that world. I got out of it because I just fell too deep into the functional medicine rabbit hole. But I did quite a lot of training in it before kind of getting out of it. And I still remember they did a really great job in like it was like 801 level class, functional neurology 101, the basics. This is where you start. They always did a really good job of reminding us neurons need glucose, oxygen delivery, and stimulation. And, so in the instance of our single neuron in the Petri dish, that example, if we just gave it some friends, right? Like if we connected all of those neurons in a big circuit and they could all stimulate each other and talk to each other, that's a completely different scenario versus a lone neuron that's all by itself and it's not getting stimulated and it has nobody to talk to.
Right.
Now, stimulation can be different things, but basically it ends up meaning any of the senses. So you can stimulate neuronal pathways with vision, with, with things like light. You could stimulate neuronal pathways with sound, with hearing, with smell, with touch. So and taste being the other, but there's also this like kind of sixth sense, which is proprioception, which is your ability to feel with your skin and the position of your joints and, the mechanisms in your tendons and your joints and your bones. You have this amazing ability to feel where your body parts are in space. So even if I close my eyes, I can tell you right now that I'm touching the tips of my fingers to the tip of my thumb on my left hand. Even with my eyes closed, I can tell you that my hand is really close to my forehead, and now the hand is further away from my forehead, and my elbow is bending and my elbow is straightening. You don't necessarily think about that as a sense because we talk about 5 senses, but that's like the 6th sense is proprioception. Well, what better way to stimulate your nervous system with a ton of proprioceptive input than movement? Right? Like, I don't care what it is. You could be doing jazzercise. Yes, that's still a thing. You could be CrossFit. You could be running. You could be gardening. I don't care. But if you're moving your body and like using your muscles and using your tendons, you are stimulating your nervous system. And as an added bonus, if you do something that is a bit taxing, so if you do like cardio or weightlifting, something that actually gets your blood pressure up and your heart rate up, well, now we get back to that idea of forcibly pushing blood into your brain, which is a really, 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 really good thing. So yeah, that's the biggest way I would look at it. It doesn't even have to be fancier than that. It's just you're giving your brain a ton of what it loves, which is proprioceptive input and sensory input. And the exercise scientist in me and the former trainer in me wants to say, I really don't know if it matters what type of exercise you do. You just need to find something you enjoy and stick with it. So again, it could be kickboxing, it could be Pilates, it could be walking, it could be whatever. As long as you're going to stick with it, that's what actually matters. Because what I see happen more frequently, with myself included, is that a lot of times we will convince ourselves that we need to do some sort of like badassery. Like, oh, I need to train for a marathon. Oh, I need to join a CrossFit gym. Oh, I need to do this and get on the elliptical. But if you don't like it, you're not going to comply with it for very long. You're maybe going to go to the gym for like a month or 2, and then you're going to fall off the wagon. So just make sure that you're sticking with something that is doable and enjoyable so that you can make it part of your life instead of it being like the 1 month I went to the gym.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think, again, I like that just trying to move your body in ways that make you happy is really the summary of it. And
K-pop dancing, if that's your jam.
Right. Yeah, I think the only caveat, again, would be some of my clients that are over exercisers, which it might like flame out and cause more inflammation, which you can't recover from. Now, if you're again exercising in a healthy way, there's a degree of inflammation that your body adapts to, and there's a generally anti-inflammatory counter response. But if you don't have the resources, potentially fuel in particular, to exercise, like if someone's lost a bunch of weight, maybe doing something gentle but not pushing it too hard until you can get kind of calories up. But yeah, that's the only like counterpoint, I think, or something to consider when I'm working with someone from a client standpoint. Sometimes focusing on nutrition first if you're in a bad spot, which most people, again, could. Exercise is totally fine, but for people that have lost a bunch of weight, I'd be careful.
That's a good point. Well, I do think too, we've talked about overtraining before, and we've seen that with some clients that some people are really into movement, but to a point where they're overdoing it and they're putting too much strain on their body. And it would actually be beneficial for those folks to maybe take like a 2-week break where they don't exercise at all,
Right.
and then get into it more moderately. You know, if you were doing 6-7 days a week, maybe chill it out a little bit and go down to 5 so that you're not overtaxing your body. I think that is more common with athletes and former athletes, where it's like they don't know how to turn it off almost.
I've definitely been there myself. I have definitely overtrained because the reference point's hard to understand. If you're someone that's always given like 110% and you just don't know, especially if you're having a health issue like gut issues, and maybe if you were at your healthiest point and able to eat a bunch of foods and stuff like that, training hard wouldn't affect you. But since you're basically struggling with some health issues and for whatever reason your body might not be able to tolerate that level of intensity, it might make sense to dial it back. I would say the biggest group of people that I see often are like runners. And as a former runner, again, it's a different breed of person that's a runner, I feel like. And I mean that affectionately. My dad was a marathon runner. And again, I just think that can be really, depending on the length of running, typically if someone's running 2 or 3 miles, maybe even 4 miles, often, I don't know, like depending on the person,
That
if
might
that's
be
going to...
okay.
Right. But if you're running more distance-y type stuff and like training for half marathons and stuff like that, I don't know.
Again,
I find that it's...
If you're training every single day and you don't really
Right.
give yourself a rest
Right.
ever.
Right. And again,
Yeah.
like it's not that you can't play around with it. So if you are someone that really enjoys more intense exercise, you could take 2 weeks off and see if it helps, or play around with the frequency or distance, or like there's stuff you can experiment with there. But yeah, it's not necessarily that I have the answer when I work with someone who's a runner and they're running maybe like 8 miles, 4 or 5 days a week. And I would say, it's like a little far. Maybe decrease the mileage a little bit and let's see how you do. And we can kind of dial it back that way. But yeah, it might just take some experimentation to figure out what's going to work.
Yeah. Well, and I think being open-minded to experimenting with that. I was actually going to say, I feel like it was moderately recently, like in the last 10 episodes, I might have shared what I've now called the Dorito test, which is my fun kind of teasy way to weed out disordered eating, where if I bring up in a session the idea of, what would you say if I told you to eat a Dorito? Like, I've had some people where they're like, oh, I would love a Dorito.
Right.
And I've had other people where they're like, I have no other way to describe it, but they're traumatized by the sheer thought of
the
eating
horror.
a Dorito. Yeah. And honestly, I already knew that they would react that way when I've done this to some of these people. And, you know, it's the people who are clearly very obsessed with clean eating, and they're orthorexic, and it's clear as day to me that they have orthorexia and they're obsessed with clean eating. And that's where I kind of came up with this. I was like, I'm just going to pick something that is so processed that it's going to horrify them. And I'm just going to see how they react. But I think that if the thought of, shy of you having an anaphylactic allergy, if the thought of just experimenting and having one Dorito is legitimately scary to you or traumatic to you, I think that that's a sign that you have some disordered eating and orthorexia stuff to sort out. Similarly, if you talk to an active person and you suggest, hey, maybe you should reduce your training or take like a 2-week break and not exercise at all. If they're like, maybe, yeah, but they're open-minded, then maybe that's the person who needs it slightly less. But if the sheer thought of doing that freaks them out, and they dig their heels in and they're like, no, I can't take a break for X, Y, Z reasons. I need to train. And no. Those are the people who need it the most. So
Right.
just
I
if
agree.
you're listening to this and you're thinking that we're crazy people and you're never going to cut down on your running or your CrossFit or your whatever, you need to.
Right.
That's a tell.
I agree.
Yeah.
I 100% agree.
Well, I don't want to make this episode too long, but let's just make quick mention of I think the last big foundational tenet in all of this. So again, we talked about blood sugar, oxygen delivery, movement, sleep. We've got to mention stress,
Yeah.
right? Like that's such a biggie. If you're breathing and you live on planet Earth, you probably have stress, but especially in current times. And especially if
Yeah.
you have a health struggle. And again, I'll throw out there, I know stress and anxiety are two different things, but they oftentimes get folded together in similar conversations. And we have talked about stress and anxiety and mental health with guests and with each other over the years. I guess what I want to say is that similar to what we said earlier, there is a very real gut to brain element to this, where if you build resiliency and health in your gut, it will promote health and resiliency in your nervous system, and you'll be able to handle stressors more effectively, and you'll be able to control any anxiety or OCD tendencies more effectively. So there is a gut to brain component of this. But
Yeah.
like I said, out of all the hundreds of people I've worked with, I've seen maybe 3 where we work on the gut and then their anxiety is miraculously like 90% better. So I just want people to be open-minded to the thought that their stress and their mental health and their anxiety is actually affecting their gut way more than they realize.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up the mental health stress piece. And again, I
Talking
almost
to your mic, dear.
Oh, sorry. It's interesting you bring up the mental health and stress dynamic, because I do think it's interesting. I've had conversations with Jenna about this recently, and I like this idea of a piggy bank. You have only so many resources to devote different places. Now, if you're strapped with so much going on, either you're just overwhelmed with things or you lack joy too. I think that can lead to stress in your body too. So again, like if you're overwhelmed by just work and taking care of kids and like you get no break and like there's that person, but I also think there's people that are stressed out because they've isolated themselves in some way because of their gut stuff. And it's hard because you don't feel well. I was someone that isolated a lot more than I probably should have. But I do think from a piggy bank standpoint, if you are really stressed and overwhelmed, it leads to more anxiety because you can't really cope with the level of anxiety as easily. Like you get overwhelmed, and your body just can't function as well to begin with. But yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to stress, I know I've said this before in past episodes, as simple as this is, you have to do things daily to fill your cup. Doesn't mean you have to do all of the things, but I think that you should probably be doing at least something 15 minutes a day that fills your cup. So that could be, playing the guitar for 10 or 15 minutes. It could be just going outside and sitting on your porch for 10 or 15 minutes, or, spending time with your husband for 10 or 15 minutes, whatever it is. Like, I don't necessarily have all the answers for you, but the stress management piece, I think, gets very zen-y quickly, where people say, oh, you have to meditate, you have to do breath work. And again, I love all these things too. Some people really like those. That could be a part of your 15 minutes. But I also think it doesn't have to be limited to that either. It's just, what do you need in the moment? Can you meet that need?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to put it. And I like that you called out that world for being kind of, zen, almost to a point of being woo, right? Where it's like, oh, you have to, put the lavender oil in the diffuser and align your chakras and get in the perfect position and say Om. And that's lovely. If that's like your jam, more power to you.
Right.
But if you're like me and your stress relief is going outside or like chit-chatting with the neighbors so that I interact with an adult who's not my husband every now and then. Love him. Love you, Mike. But, like it being a little bit more extroverted, like just chit-chatting with some other people, like that's a good stress relief. Or going for a walk, or going to a store, like shopping. Shopping could be a stress relief. Painting for me is a big one. So it doesn't have to fit that stereotypical meditate on a cushion and smell your incense and say Om kind of picture of stress relief. It could be whatever you want it to be. I mean, for you, tennis, right? You've been getting really into playing tennis.
Tennis, guitar, going outside. I think that the problem is, and I like meditation too. I like some of the woo-woo stuff, some of the more like meditation zen-y things too. Like I can utilize those. It's not the only thing I utilize. I kind of go through seasons, I feel like, where I get more into meditation, and that's really valuable for me. And then I go more into like, oh, I'm going to play guitar. I'm in like the tennis, very much into the tennis season right now. But unfortunately, the fact that like self-care and meditation sort of gets lumped into the meditation space, I often think when you bring up stress management and stuff, it almost, if someone isn't connected to that in a way, I almost think they're like deterred by it. Mm-hmm. So like, I'm not into that, and so they don't think of it as more broadly. And so if you're in that camp, I don't want you to think you can't do self-care or stress management. It just might look very different for you, and that's totally okay.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And even simple things like I'm 6 feet tall, and even in the big garden tub that I have, my knees stick out of the tub. So, a hot bath can be really lovely if my back is sore or if I'm just like really tired. But a bubble bath has never been my big go-to for stress relief, even though they're lovely. It's just that we as a society do not make baths big enough for me, usually.
I feel like we should start a petition or something.
We should.
Like bath fitters. We should like...
I'm sure that there are custom rig tubs, right? Like NBA players have to have bathtubs. Sometimes, they probably do Epsom salt soaks every now and then when they're sore. These big 7-foot tall dudes. So I'm sure that you could get one custom made. But the problem is if you're trying to get a tub off the shelf or in a house that you move into, you'd be hard pressed to find one where like your whole body could be submerged comfortably for more than a nanosecond. So I'm just saying, like, that's just one kind of goofy example that, a bubble bath and like lighting candles and sipping on wine. Like that's the cliche stress relief for the middle-aged white lady. And that sounds lovely, but also that's never been my particular flavor. Like I would rather lay on my bed and just watch a couple of K-pop dance videos and, and like have a square of chocolate and maybe throw some paint on a canvas and go outside and talk to the neighbors. It doesn't have to be anything super elaborate or crazy. It can just be everyday
sure.
stuff, but if it makes you happy, that makes you happy.
Yeah, for sure.
Don't
I
need to
agree.
overcomplicate it. If there's a theme to this episode, again, blood sugar, make sure you're not anemic, get some sleep, get some movement, manage your damn stress. There you go. There's the executive summary of the whole dang episode in 20 seconds. You didn't need to listen to the hour and a half episode, turns out, but hopefully it was valuable for you to listen to it anyway, because we enjoyed producing it. So like I said, in the next video or episode, whatever you want to call this, we will be talking about the gut-brain axis, the vagus nerve, some polyvagal theory. So stay tuned for that. In the meantime, have a wonderful rest of your spring day. Go get some sunshine on your face, and we'll meet you right back here for the next episode of the IBS Freedom Podcast.
Peace.